Okay, now I think we're live. We both realized it at the same time that we were talking to nobody.
Yes.
So everybody missed the best part of the show there when the mics were muted. That was the most important piece of advice. But welcome to the Dev Talk Show here on June, is it 28th? It is June 28th of 2024. It's been a little while. Month of June was busy, but glad to be back and talking very soon about Blazor WebAssembly and adding authentication yourself from scratch, continuing on from a part one that's a few weeks old now, but we kind of laid the foundation there. And so on this stream, we're going to see maybe we can get users signed in. Again, you know, a lot of this, if you are new to this show, we know we don't necessarily rehearse here. And so we'll see how far we can get. We're coding the way you do. So if you want to skip ahead a few minutes, you'll see us get started with that. Maybe I'll try and get a timestamp in the YouTube video later if you're watching us in the future. But right now, first, we want to start with a couple things that have happened in the last few weeks that we think you might be interested in. And Rich, you had some stuff to share that looks really cool that even happened yesterday. So
yeah, definitely. So I'll drop a link in the comments here so you can follow along. But there is it was up on the dev blogs, but basically we can probably share my screen.
Oops. Yeah. There it goes.
Awesome. So this is something that actually got announced a couple days ago, but there's going to be a .NET Aspire Developers Day. So think of a full day, you know, as the .NET team has done with other projects, focused completely on this subject. So what is Developers Day? So there's, well, obviously it's going to be a full day of sessions, but focusing on, whoops, I'm in the wrong window. Try this one. There we go. There'll be key night sessions from Glenn Condren and Maddie Montecchia. They'll start things off, and then we'll have a bunch of deep dive sessions from some of the other experts who have been working on some of the .NET with the .NET tooling, and then some additional sessions and things that come out from the community. With partners like Mongo and New Relic and Raygun. So some really great stuff. We've done .NET Aspire here on a couple shows. It's something that I really am passionate about learning to use and learning to use better, because I certainly don't know it well enough to say that I could, you know, be part of anything like that. But I think one of the things that can kind of help with that, though, is down here there is and I probably don't have my zoom in on because I just rebooted, but essentially yesterday, for those who are watching live or on this day, the 28th, there was actually a 2-hour session with led by Jeff Fritz, friend of the show. And he basically does like a basic intro 2-hour session around .NET Aspire. And the video for that is here. It's all laid out with all the various chapters in there. So kind of getting started, building on a unified platform, what every app needs. So kind of really setting the stage for why .NET Aspire is important, and then walking through the various components like smart defaults and the developer dashboard and orchestration, all the things that kind of get included inside of .NET Aspire. So definitely recommend checking that out as a course, but then also come back on the 27th, and I'm sorry, on July 23rd, which is this here, to see the full day of .NET Aspire. So
that's really cool. And I did not get to check out that. I like you said, like the intro stream. I think it was streamed.
Yes. Yeah, they did it live. So there's a lot of chat as well. Like Jeff usually has a good community involvement around that.
Right. And that there's going to be a full day coming up is pretty neat. And we did look at it on this show. So, you know, we're getting a look at it. And it was one of those things that like it previewed in .NET 8, but GA'd kind of mid-cycle, meaning that it was released just a couple weeks ago. Well, maybe a month ago now. And then I think we'll see what happens with it in .NET 9. So, yeah, definitely would like to see us using it a little bit more. So, all right. Now, hold on. I'm not sure. It's interesting now that it's summer break, because a lot of people who've watched the show know that our unofficial producer on the show is my dog, and he's very confused right now because he thinks he's trying to decide who he should be hanging out with, and I'm not sure if he's going to be demanding entry into the show soon. We'll see. So I'm not sure about what happened with your camera there.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm going to get set up. Okay, I'm going to get set up here to switch over to our code for today.
I think we're rebuilding this machine this weekend.
Okay.
I say that jokingly, but the interesting thing is that I've been doing so much more with dev boxes. I actually have a couple different dev boxes set up. One that's focused on doing AI stuff, another one that's more developer-y stuff. And this machine can be a lot more lightweight than it is. So that's what I'm going to focus on.
Yeah, there's some other things I want to tackle, and I don't know. I've been trying to figure out how to do these in a way that we can talk about them on the show. You know about like dev home, dev drive, dev box, all those different things. So I do want to create a dev drive, and I haven't done that yet.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's the kind of thing that like something that's always, I think, very difficult as a developer or just someone who wants to share in the community is there's a lot of things in our space that you set up once and then that's it. Your machine is set up. And so I've often tried to say, like, well, I want to capture that. I want to like maybe record doing it because then, it's not lost forever. And I just simply haven't done that with DevBox yet. So I'm sorry, with Dev Drive.
Right.
So I've never set one up. I have space on my disk just like waiting. And my understanding is that this is a neat feature, but I've never even tried it. I don't even know. And it might even be so transparent that you set up the drive and then you just work and it's okay. I don't really feel it different, but I don't know yet. And the same thing goes with Dev Home.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I just have not really used because I say to myself, I want to set it up on the air.
Right.
But so then I just don't do it.
Yeah. We should plan for that because Dev Drive, yes, once you set it up, and we can walk through the steps of doing it. It's like what we used to do with virtual machines, right? You set up a partition of your drive, and that's all dedicated. And the way that it accesses files is much quicker than it does in the native NTFS drive. So, but the other cool thing is Dev Home. I played with that earlier this week, and it was completely amazing what it let me do as far as setup, where I could basically say, well, this is. I did it on my new dev box, and it's, well, what applications do you want? And you basically go through a list and say, well, I need Docker, and I need Visual Studio Code, and I need, and if things weren't part of that list, I could add them by just like, it's surprising how much was in there. Things like Karnak and live Zoom it were in there as well, right? So, but what's great is I get the YAML file that's my configuration.
Yeah,
and I can save that for using on my local machine, on another DevBox machine, what have you. So it's pretty awesome.
Okay.
And
I haven't tried it
preview.
Yet. There's some other things that I'm working on. For example, I actually have a machine here that I think I can use to do things like building your dev machine from scratch, whether it's Linux or Windows. I think I can do that. And so there's a lot of definitely some stuff. So, okay, I'm just making sure. I had trouble with my second machine here that kind of I can use to monitor the stream. People are wondering, why am I looking off camera? And that machine was just really hung up. But now it looks like I'm seeing that it looks like we are actually live, believe it or not. So that's good. And we can get.
Well, that explains why the numbers went down to 0, and now they're starting to bounce back up. All right. Well, welcome, everyone.
Yeah. All right. So last time, Blazor WebAssembly, the code that you're seeing on the screen right now is that project in the state that we left it, which what we did is we created a new Blazor project from scratch. We used, in fact, let's see, what settings did we use? I'm not actually going to create another new project, but we essentially said we're going to create a new solution. And we are going to use .NET 8 because there was a significant enough change between 7 and 8 that, you don't have things like render modes. So it actually really does change the game significantly. But left authentication type as none instead of individual accounts. If you pick individual accounts, you, as people who've been joining us know, you get all kinds of code. And what really inspired the series that we've been doing and us looking at this live is, what did I just get? And so, and then second was, well, if I have my own project off to the side, can I add this later? And the answer is yes. That's what we've been learning. We left it at WebAssembly render mode and global, and I've been including sample pages. You don't have to do that in your own projects, but I've been including it just so we kind of have something ready to go, ready to work with. I'm not going to create a new project here because that's what we did. And as a quick recap, what are the things we had to do? Well, first of all, when you create a WebAssembly project in a web app, when you create a web app using interactive WebAssembly, said that correctly, in Blazor, you get two projects. You get what we often refer to as the server project, that is just whatever you named your solution. And then you get what we refer to as the client project, that by default it will put a .client postfix on. What ends up happening here, the rule of thumb, without getting too deep into general Blazor talk, which of course is important, and I think we'll have to figure out how to recap a lot of this stuff as we head toward .NET 9. I think that might be a good time to recap a lot of this. Is components that you intend to use the interactive render mode of either WebAssembly or Auto have to be in your client project. In other words, if you intend for WebAssembly to either take control of that component or page, or if you want Auto to be able to do it both ways, then the component or page has to be here in client. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I've when I try to explain, like, where do these things go? Where do they live? So in the sample project, as you can see, if you create a new project and you say global, all of the pages are sitting here in client. And well, why? Because you said global. You said everything was going to be WebAssembly. So they're just doing what you asked.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the basic of that. And then what you have now is this kind of interesting world where you have routes.razor living here, and routes.razor is the place that we've often gone to. Well, we don't necessarily go here all that much, but it's trying to think of a way to put it. It's the place that you go to. Well, one of the first things you can do is put the authorized route view here instead of the route view that will be dropped in if you create a project without any authorization of any kind, any authentication of any kind.
Right.
Because as we talked about last time, the authorized route view, just by putting in an authorized route view component, and it's even trying to tell us here in the tooltip, the component supplies a cascading parameter which makes the user's current authentication state available to descendants. It's a big mouthful, but what it's doing is that is the setup piece to allow you to start using this on your pages or components.
Right. Yeah, because we tried that too.
And in fact, on purpose. And so I've been trying to. I think when we did this last time, so if you watch the video, which is linked in the comments, I was hoping that this would stick as I zoomed in, but it's not. There it goes. Is I kind of on purpose say, well, if I have an app that I want to have authorized content and not authorized content on the same page, well, what do? I use this component. I use the authorized view component, which is built into Blazor. So you try to use it, and it doesn't work. And that's the beginning of the journey of, well, how do I make it work then?
Right.
So, and that's kind of everything we did. Again, we're not going to go, we've got part 1 linked. Definitely should watch part 1, but just to quickly recap what we did have to do is in Program CS on the server side, we added a few things. We basically added this scoped service, which is an authentication state provider. if you look in the template, one of the interesting ways that you can figure this stuff out is create a new project with the authentication and then create it without and start doing comparisons. And you're going to find this in the template with authentication. The authentication state provider and authentication state provider service is added for dependency injection. And they use this specific one, which is a mouthful, called the persisting server authentication state provider. And then it adds authentication and authorization. We are doing no setup there right now. There may be more coming. And I think that was pretty much it. Everything else here came with the template. So you had to do that. And you had to add now we go to the client project. We added and talked about this authentication state provider class, which is, note that this isn't me diving into .NET framework, .NET platform code. This is our code. This is persistent. Yeah, we own it. Persistent authentication state provider. It's in the client project. It derives from the authentication state provider. And we even left this comment here so that we can, this is the comment from the version in the template. I don't know why my dog is howling about something. He's feeling left out somehow. But we made some minor changes.
Okay.
The number one change we made is in their sample, they create a claim for name and for email. We might come back and do the email one, but we wanted to really simplify it.
Okay.
So what this essentially does is when somebody creates a persistent authentication state provider, which this is handled in the Blazor framework is handling firing this up and looking into it. When I say that, that's a little hand wavy, but because we've added an authentication state provider and because the authorized route view is there saying, well, I need an authentication state provider to do my work. That's what's kicking it off. I don't want to make it sound like magic. Is what it does is it says, okay, let me save the state of this user into what's called persistent component state, something built into Blazor that you can store quite literally anything. And then what happens is that as other components that are disconnected from whatever work you did want to find out what's in that thing, it can basically say, okay, let me come in here and get the authentication state, and then I'll decide what that means. And so what we're doing in this is we're just setting a claim on the current claims principal to say this is their name. That's it. That's all we're doing.
And that state object, because we've, when we did a show with the Blazor app that I built, we had to put our own state object in there so we could have communication between different components. Is this something similar that you created, or this is you're doing authentication, we know you're going to need to receive state?
Yeah, so persistent component state, there's a couple answers to that question. Persistent component state is part of Blazor.
Okay.
There is we will need to do a state and sharing of state like dive, because not only is there a lot to it, there are some gotchas that some of our friends have really been working through, like Rocky Laka and Carl Franklin. Even Jeff Fritz has worked through it with Carl, about if you really is important to you to have per component render modes, and this is your application's decision when I say if it's important to you, that you want component render modes, you want this component doing this and that component doing that, you're going to have to dive into the world of how state is persisted. If you're living in global, I don't want to say you can ignore it, but you may never run across issues.
Makes sense.
So, but here, this is not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the situation that's the slight pivot. And the pivot is, we have a client-side app running in WebAssembly. You're going to log in. In our samples, we aren't going to a database. We're not going to an authentication system, not yet. and confirming that the password you entered is correct. We're not doing any of that. So that's why we talk about this not being production ready. I'm trying to separate that from how does the authentication work.
Yeah.
So,
because then you connect it up to whatever you're doing.
You connect it to whatever you're doing. That's exactly it. Like, we're not here because otherwise, how many shows do you, one for this type, one for this thing?
Right.
Oh, maybe what if you store it in your own database? So the idea is let's learn how to sign someone in, but it is up to you to authenticate them and make sure that yes, I know you are who you say you are. I'm going to sign you in. Those are actually two different, in identity world, those are actually two different processes. It would be as if I was the bouncer at the club that you're being allowed into, and I have the clipboard, and let's just say that we trust the clipboard is correct. It's our authority. We trust it, that the name's on it, and even maybe to make you a little bit more confident in it, it's got the names and your driver's license numbers, just so that you're very confident. And when you show up with your driver's license, I authenticate it by going Rich Ross, and let me check. Yep, the driver's license number matches. Okay, my authority says you are who you say you are. Awesome. That's great. You're in. But so now I've let you in. So, but there's two different activities there. There's the authentication activity of confirming that what you told me to prove who you are is true. And now I've signed you in. And they're two different things. So if you're watching this or watching part one or watching any of our other shows and you're like, well, you just signed them in on faith. And it's like, well, we're not dealing with the authentication, like proving that the password was correct. We're just saying like, yep, they filled out the form correctly. You're trusting them. What do you do next?
And again, it's like, it's that there's some mechanism of doing that. So,
right. Yes. Sometimes you store things in a database. Sometimes you're going out to an external login provider.
Don't store things in a database.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that we are. I think there's a lot of people,
choices,
including us, that want to just say sign in with a provider, especially if you're at work.
Right.
You're at work, and it's like, well, I'm already signed in, so why can't I just use that? So, what is this thing doing? Well, what this thing is for is, and it's interesting because it's living on the client side. So when we go to the server side, let me see if I can find we have the persisting server authentication state provider. And I was just looking at the persisting server authentication state provider, which oddly enough lives in the client project. So it's a little weird. No, wait, I take it back. The persisting. Okay, let's get this right. Let's find out. Let's look at where all these places are. So the persisting, the wording even got my tongue here. The persisting server authentication state provider lives on the server, and the persistent authentication state provider lives on the client. Naming is hard. We took these names from the templates, but you could call them whatever you want. Okay. So the persisting server authentication state provider is the system saying, is the server side saying, when it's time to persist state, what we're going to do is get whoever is signed in. If someone is authenticated and signed in, then let's get that claims principal and let's persist some of its user info out of it. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and get the user ID claim type. This could be whatever claims you want. Let's get this out of here and let's persist it. And in fact, the state helper, the state, what is this? This is a persistent component state object. It has a helper on it called persist as JSON, where you can give it a string key and you can give it pretty much, well, in this case, we're giving it a user info. And it's basically just saying, okay, I'm going to save some JSON in this state bag here, and that'll get picked up later.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on here.
No worries.
All right. So that seems like a lot, and it's probably harder to talk through than it is when you actually see it in action.
Yeah.
Over on the client side, meaning the WebAssembly side, the WebAssembly opens up that persistent component state and says, well, let me tear it back apart. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a claims principle and keep it for myself as if somebody is signed in. And now why are we doing all this? Why are we going through this big hassle? And the reason is, the main reason and the reason why, if you've been watching us for a long time and you said, gosh, on the server side, whether you were Blazor server or just server side rendered, this was so easy. Well, it's because authentication is inherently inherently a server side activity. There's no way I can write an app that lives purely on your client device, PC, mobile device, tablet, whatever, that can authenticate who you are without leaving that device to go verify it. Otherwise, you own the device. You can just tell me, yeah, sure, it's me.
Right.
And that may not be great in all situations. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I feel like I could have explained it better, but let's run it and see where we're at.
Okay.
So if you followed part 1, and if you haven't, then I encourage you, maybe follow along in part 1, or we'll talk about the GitHub repo later. Remember that this started life as a Blazor application that we chose no authentication on.
Right.
We added this login page, but other than that, it's your typical counter and weather, typical stuff here. We're used to seeing this before many times. But what we have done is we've added an authorized view to home, and it is saying you're not signed in. If I go to our log, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was a component that we looked at when we were looking at the authorization routes.
Yep. If I go to the login page, it also says, it says this is going to be the page to log in, and it says you are not logged in. So real quick, let's go see what that means. If I go to home.razor, we use the authorized view to make that decision. And if we go to login.razor, we use the authorized view to make that decision. Just what to put, what to write.
Right.
Okay. So now this is, and I thought that was an interesting stopping point. It was a pretty good stopping point. But now the big drum roll is, what do you do now?
Yeah.
And that's going to be, we're going to need a way for people to sign in. And I think what we'll do is we're going to put a form on the login page.
Okay.
And we'll use that form. Let's see. I actually have. Hold on. Here's where I needed to have some of our previous work ready, because trying to do this from scratch, it'll take forever for me to remember. Let's see. Hold on. Sorry about this. And it's going to be interesting to see what seemed so easy on server side. It seemed pretty easy on server side. How is this going to be on client side, I think. Okay. Yeah. All right. We could start with this. Okay. So here's our login Razor page. And we're saying this will be the page to log in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually leave a little bit of space there, so that's a little easier to actually, let's not use that. Let's use BR. Okay. And if you're already logged in, our goal is that this starts getting activated, that you are already logged in stuff.
Okay.
But you're not logged in. So let's say, let's use like H3, and we'll say login. And then we'll create, let's create an edit form. Let's see how much Copilot wants to help us here. Look at that. Let's see. How did you do here, Copilot? You want to create an edit form with input text. This isn't bad, but I think there's a lot to change. No, actually, it's okay.
You're not really
Okay.
binding a value there, right?
No, yeah, I think we're going to eliminate some of this.
Okay.
We don't need password for this demonstration.
Right.
We're not going to bind a value. So let's just, it's interesting how much it doesn't like this. That's a little better. Okay. I don't necessarily know that I need a placeholder either. So.
Oh, well, the placeholder is like the ghost text that's kind of there.
Yeah.
Before you put something in, right?
It is. I don't know that we've
You don't
used it
need it.
before, but
Yeah.
I guess we can leave it.
Yeah. Do we need
Go
to
ahead.
name that control?
We are going to need to bind it to a model value.
Okay.
But so let's say we do nothing and we
Yep.
just run this. I'm going to run it just for the sake of showing that from an HTML perspective. Oh,
Oops.
what are you not happy about? Oh, I see. All right. Uses the same context. I see what it's complaining about is. That's interesting that just trying to create the form in here didn't work because what was that error again? How the child content
Right?
element of component edit form uses the same parameter name as enclosing child content element not authorized. Huh. That's interesting. So they give you a way that you can resolve it, but I'm not 100% sure. I only want the not authorized to come up if we're not logged in, right? That's the only thing that I want. So my question is, does it really need its own context? Maybe it does. Or do I just need to give it
submit, right? Because it's a form.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if this form, giving it a form name is good enough.
Okay.
Let's call it my login form. If this doesn't work, then I've learned something. Yeah, look at that. Okay.
Same error, yeah.
Specify parameter name. Interesting. So, because we are at the step of doing this without making it its own component, because I think when it's made its own component, then we won't need this.
It's not a child anymore.
Right. We haven't done this before. Not child content, child context, right? What did it say?
Equals
I'll admit.
or space content equal
context
equals.
Context. Yeah. Okay. I'll admit to not having done this.
Wasn't context menu?
It was context, right?
Yeah. And then do you have to wrap that in there? Like bring the...
No, that's a good point. Maybe that's... What's it telling us? Is it telling us...
That's still there. That's good. Interesting. Yeah.
Huh. This is not the final form we intend to be at, but this is an interesting little learning experience here. I don't feel like we had to do that previously, but I wonder if we jumped ahead. Still not happy about this. Child content, context, another name found. Oh, so when it says child content, is it just that I needed to do this? Because I'm really unfamiliar with this thing.
Yeah, that's a new one for me as well.
Yeah. I just admit, like, that took me by surprise. Child content, is that a component? Apparently not. Maybe it was just an attribute and the error message is trying to help us. What the error message must be saying, for example, not authorized has a context, I'm guessing, right?
Sure.
This is a part of Blazor that I don't think we know very well. So if I say blah, 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 now can I take this out? Because it's like, oh, yeah, it's a different context. Or no, you inherited it. We're we're gonna have to look into this.
Yeah.
Because I find this interesting. Not super relevant for us right now. Okay, so this should, let's see if this gets us through. Just adding a context attribute. Oh, I've got it. My dog can't make a decision as to where he wants to be. With the whole family home, I thought like he is going to be confused about what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so unhandled error has occurred. Look at this. Edit. Oh, well, that's not bad. This is actually what I expected to happen. Okay.
Okay.
I got off track. So we created a form. The form didn't render. And the reason why it didn't render is because it says, look, you didn't give me a model parameter or an edit context.
Okay.
And that's for people who are new to Blazor wondering like, what's going on here? It's like, well, we need to tell it when someone submits, what do I bind these things up to in C# code?
Okay.
One way to put it, right? So we're going to need a model. And if you've watched us before, what we did is just to keep things simple, and I'm not sure how well this is going to work in client side, we're going to find out, is we created a class called credential. You don't have to call the class credential. You can call it anything you want. And it probably doesn't belong here. This might be something that we eventually want to refactor out to something that's a little more centralized, decentralized. Yeah. We want you to be able to provide a name, a username. In some future, we might say, let's go ahead and implement password, but we don't need that today.
Sure.
So we now know we have a class, we have some type that we want to bind to, but we still need to say that this particular form takes one of these credentials. There might be nothing in it as its model. So it has to be nullable, or at least in our previous experience, it had to be nullable. I never want to say for sure that there's only one way to do things. So our component contains a nullable model that is of type credential, and credential has one field in it, one parameter. It's a name. Okay. So now that we have that, I can come up here and I can say that this particular, is it model? Yeah, that's right. So a little confusing on the terminology there. This particular form binds to a model of type of the name model.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a little bit confusing, I could do something like this, form model, or even just to make it really clear to everybody that this is my own parameter. If I do this, that still works, right? The names here have to match.
Okay.
I'm mapping the model for this form is this instance right here. That's what it is. So that's, if I use the word model, not that there's anything wrong with it. I just think that like, oh, you're saying model everywhere. What are you?
Right.
Right. So, okay. It's just for clarity. It's not, you know. Now, let's see. I'm kind of curious if I even need context anymore, but let's not touch that yet. The other thing I need to do is when somebody clicks submit, what happens?
Right.
In traditional HTML, your form would have an on submit, go to this get, go to this post. That's traditional HTML. Blazor's kind of like giving us that look and feel. But what is it going to do on submit? So it turns out there's another attribute on submit. And what you do is you tell it run this method. And I'm going to call it submit. So there's got to now be some method in our code that's called submit. And you can see Blazor's going crazy right now, or Visual Studio saying, no. I'm wondering if the refactorings are going to help me. I was just wondering. I'm not seeing it giving me an option here. So no big deal. We'll come down and we got to create a method. And since this is all being contained in our component, we can make this private. So you got to have something.
Okay.
And now that I've done that, that's cured this problem. Somebody submits, I will do something. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and take that suggestion there just for now, just to write to the console.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's see now. Let's see if this is enough to get the form up. No, it's still not happy. And it's not happy because edit form requires either a model parameter. Okay, so you're like, well, wait a second. I thought you just did a bunch of work to supply a model parameter. Well, I didn't actually. All I really did was say that you should go to my form model. You should go to this instance to get what you need to bind to. So here's a little bit of a pop quiz, and it's totally unfair to you, Rich, but also to the people watching.
Go for it.
I just said to use this my form model parameter, use this field in order to read and write the current state of this credential. Why is it saying that it doesn't exist?
Because you didn't new it up when initialized?
Awesome. That was great. That was great. And I actually think that's a harder question than it sounds. I really do.
It sounded like it was too easy.
Because I think you'll look at it and be like, I don't know. Why didn't it work? And it's like, because this is null.
Right.
So Blazor grabbed it and said, okay, sure. Let me grab my form model. Well, wait a second. This is null. I can't use this. And that can be a pretty easy thing to just totally miss. And so what we're going to do is in our constructor, well, I'm sorry, I want to use the word constructor. In our onInitialize,
right,
we're going to say model. Whoops. Sorry, it's my form model. We need a new one of these. And we'll even use this fancy C# feature target type parameters where it just figures it out.
Now, it's just giving us a new instance of it, even though the credential itself doesn't have a constructor.
Right. The credential, we didn't create it. We didn't create a constructor for credential. That's true. Okay. But the problem is because the credential class, if I were to have created this is an interesting point. If I were to create a credential class that was not nullable, that issue may just go away because credential is like, yeah, okay, sure. The name is null, but whatever. I'm not nullable. But in this particular case, the credential class is nullable. I'm sorry, the credential, that instance, my form model is nullable. So I think what's happening, I'm pretty sure what's happening is Blazor's getting a hold of this my form model. It's null. It's trying, maybe it's trying to say, well, I better start looking into this instance. And it's like, I can't, there's nothing here. I can't do anything.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I want to believe that just newing it up is going to be good enough to finally get, I don't know, I could be wrong. We're about to find out. Okay. All right. We still had a problem though. And let's see if it's related to, if it's still, okay. Requires a value for the value expression parameter. Normally, perfect. It led me to the next thing, which is cool. So now it says, got your model. I know what instance you want to do for the model, but now I'm looking through this form to bind the input text, and you didn't give me a value to bind to.
Right.
Okay, so I appreciate that I kind of try to do it piece by piece because I'm hoping people in the audience can see like, oh, here's how the dominoes roll. Because otherwise I could just throw all this in and then it still seems mysterious. Like, well, right. I don't know. You just seem to know that magic. Okay. So our input text control needs to know where in the model do I bind in order to get this particular value. And so we're going to say bind value. And we're going to say that it's from my form model. And it is my form model's name. And then what happens, of course, which is good, is Visual Studio says, hold on a second. I don't know for sure that my form model is null. Like, I don't know that for sure. Right. And what you can do, because we did make name nullable down here, what you can do is you can say, I promise you it'll be fine. I'm not 100% sure this is the best way to handle it, but I think to get us through today,
Right.
You can use the I promise you it's not null operator. All right. Now, let's see if that gets us a working form. Okay. Not only is the form running, we didn't get our exception bar that we've been getting for a while. This is stylish with the we haven't used the what is this called again?
Placeholder.
Placeholder. We haven't used that before. So I could say this, and then I'm even going to set a breakpoint and submit so that we can see we're not really doing anything. And I'm going to click login, and we come back to our breakpoint. Oh, wow. Well, no, it did it, but that was interesting that the debugger took its time there. I'm wondering if there's I have the symbol server hooked up. I'm wondering if something was going on with it. Like, hold on, I got to get a bunch of symbols, which does definitely slow me down. But because part of what I'm doing when I'm working with Blazor is I'm constantly trying to figure out what is the framework doing under the hood. I have the symbol source server set up so that I can like F10 anywhere. And it's like, now you're in Blazor code. And that's, that's been very helpful for us. So when I run this code, which doesn't do much of anything.
No, because you really didn't authenticate or even fake authenticate.
Exactly. Where did that console write line go?
Good question.
And that's another pop quiz type-ish situation. We are in a Blazor WebAssembly component, and we just did console write lines. So that means a place we're not going to find it is in the console, because that's where server-side console write lines go. So I think we're going to find it. Whoops, I hit F12 in Visual Studio.
In the wrong area, yeah.
If I hit F12 here, here it is, form submitted.
Nice.
Login page initialized. These things are going to the developer tool. Well, they're going to the console, the web browser's console in your developer tools.
Because your WebAssembly is running in the browser.
Exactly. So, little helpful tip for folks new to Blazor. I'm not trying to say you want to ship your app with a ton of console write lines. Not saying that at all. But when you're new to Blazor and you're new to render modes, you might like, what's happening here? Well, use a console write line. Go look in your console. Go look in the developer tools, and you can at least figure out, where is this code running? Is it running client side? Is it running server side? If you're doing interactive auto, I did a lot of that to be like, where is this running? So, okay, form is submitted. Cool. Doesn't do a whole lot for us, but now we are going to take that username and we're going to say that's good enough for us to sign in.
Okay.
I want to show you what we did in the server world before we try to get this working in the client world. In the server side, when we did this server side, when I say server side, the render mode with server or with Blazor server interactive components, we wrote this code. If model is not null, then we pulled out the name and we created a claim of type name with that model name. And then we created a new claims identity, and we said that it was part of the TDTS cookie authentication scheme. And then we created a claims principal and we signed the user in, and none of that code is working here.
Right. Yeah, it's all spoiled.
Now you might just say like, oh, well, I know what the problem is. You just aren't. In fact, one of the things that gets included here, and I'm just going to paste it here, is you needed this particular include in your component. But I think if I go to the top here and try to include it, this shouldn't work.
Right. Yeah,
doesn't work. Mm-hmm. This particular part of the Blazor platform is not available client side.
Okay. So it's not we missed the package.
Yeah, it's not that it's just not available. So it's like,
and I bring that up because of the two projects. That's all.
Yeah. I think it's available server side. Like if I go to, do we have a component server side? Yep. Like we have error.razor.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
See, I can bring it in. And
Because
you asked a really good question, like, can I bring it in because of, if I remember last time, I don't want that. It's packages. No. I thought maybe it was related. I think we just, because I think this add authentication comes from authentication.
yeah,
And
which I
but it
thought
did.
was a
I thought
package,
we had
but
to bring in a package for that. But to your point,
in the
let's
project.
go.
Yeah.
Let's go take a look. No, apparently
Huh.
we haven't. It's fine. It's not. I don't
Okay.
think it's. I don't think it's that big a deal yet. So this now is kind of an interesting quandary, and the problem is, okay, so I've created this login page, but I can't. Like, how do I log the user in,
Mhm.
right? And so I think this is where you have some decisions to make as a
Right.
developer. The way the template does it is it takes the login page and it moves it server side.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. I think what it might leave out is, what do you do in a disconnected scenario? In fact, I've never really tried it, to be honest, is if I were to maybe have the browser simulate losing connection, what does Blazor do? Does it just say not found? Is it like a bad situation? Or is there a way that we could detect that we can't reach the server and put up something that at least lets the user know, like, you didn't do anything wrong. We're just not going to be able. So we've been building this Razor component client side, but we can't sign people in from there.
Right.
So I'd been thinking about this a long time, is, do we just move it server side? Is there a way we could sign someone in with an API? Oh gosh, if there really is someone at the door, then hold on a second.
Okay.
I was gonna say, if my dog figures out someone's at the door, then this will get interesting. Okay, so I don't know. And I certainly know we're not going to do it in the next 20 minutes. I
Right.
don't know that we can come up with a way right now to basically have a client-side login form that maybe through API tries to sign in. I think it's possible, though. I think that could
Sure.
be done, because we could host a minimal API on the server side,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then we could sign them in and move on. But I think what we're going to try to do is we're going to try, and in fact, when I started this, I knew that this roadblock would come in, but I wanted it to be really illustrative of, like, I don't have the ability to sign in anyone. So I guess we should move the login component uh, server side and go from there.
So hitting the login button is going to open up an actual browser page. Well, a page on the a browser
A
page
page
on
on
the
the
server.
right, maybe server rendered.
Okay.
So again, as we've talked about, like, we're learning here right along with you. So if what we do, I'm trying to think of, should we copy this? I think I'll copy it. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in the account section.
Okay.
This is going to have some interesting implications, though. So now that I've done that, everything seems okay over here. What are we not happy about? We're not happy about name existing or context existing, but do I
Text.
get some help? No. I'm wondering if this is just as simple as, oops. Remember, I was just talking about it. Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication.
Right. Well, doesn't
No,
solve
that
the context.
didn't solve it. Okay.
But we have to define the. Don't we have to define the? Yeah. Wasn't there a difference in the context whether it was client side versus server side?
Oh, yes. In fact, you're right. Let me think about that. On the server side, do you need an HTTP context? I think you do. So there's some other interesting pieces to this too. So if I add a cascading parameter
There you go.
of private HTTP context, and we say so that didn't take care of that.
Doesn't that have to be HTTP context? Your variable on 28 doesn't that have to match the variable on 11?
I'm actually thinking the problem here is that this comes down from somewhere else. This comes down. See, our routes.razor is somewhere else. See, so where context comes from, where this particular field comes from, is it comes from this routes.razor by saying an authorized route view.
Okay.
But that's living in the client side. I don't have a routes.razor. Oh, that's because this is global. Interesting. So this is an interesting little quandary now. It's almost like, do we have to start taking apart global, or here's what they did in the because obviously we have an inspiration. We have the template where you just go ahead and say, hey, I'm Blazor WebAssembly and I'm global. Well, for one thing, one of the things they did is they just didn't use this, which seems like kind of like I don't want to say that it's a sneaky way out, but they just didn't use it, right? And for one thing, they didn't use authorized view at all.
That's true.
So we could do this. And here's where it'll be interesting to think about, like, is this the way we want it to work? But okay, so now, like, obviously everything's fine. Everything's great. Yeah. So
probably don't even need that context object.
I do, because I need a way to sign in.
Oh, okay.
So I think we need all this stuff. And the other thing that's going to be interesting now is I believe that we need to rethink. Okay, so app.razor is saying that everything's render mode is interactive WebAssembly. Everything. However, that's not true anymore.
No. So we should override that page.
We're going to have to override it on the
render
page.
mode server side.
That's right. And the way they do that is interesting in the global template.
Okay.
They do it by saying if there's any component that lives in this accounts folder, then it has no render mode, or a null render mode, which is essentially server side.
They're saying that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Show where that.
So just to make it clear, because it might not be obvious what I did, I have now brought over what we've been using as a reference project, which is you file new project, global WebAssembly, but you want the individual account support.
Okay.
Here's what they do in their app Razor.
Oh, okay.
They create an HTTP context. Well, they don't create one. They instantiate one solely for the purposes of being able to call this method. Starts with segments. There's a little helper method in HTTP context where it can basically tell you like, well, is the path, not the current path, is the path that you're asking me about, does it start with this? And so what they do is they say, okay, let's get the current request path and we'll call start with segments and see if it starts with a count. And if it does, then it has no interactive mode, or null interactive mode more accurately.
Right.
And if it doesn't, then it's interactive WebAssembly.
Okay.
But because we did file new project and said we didn't want any authentication, we got it this way.
Oh.
Which is basically to say everything's
No.
interactive WebAssembly. That's what you said you wanted.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, there's a way to do override render modes, right?
Yep.
But I don't think you can put null here.
That doesn't
I
like
think
it.
you can do things like this. You can say interactive auto. You can do that. You can say interactive server. You can do that. But I'm not sure. What else can you put here? Can you say none? I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
So now the interesting thing is, it really stinks because I always forget how to do this. There is a way to change the render mode. Oh man, I'm gonna feel awful because I'm not gonna remember how, and I'm not even gonna remember where to look it up. Render mode, new. There's a way to basically do this and say you want like a new render mode. Apply a render mode to a component instance. Am I going to stumble across it? So for example, apply to a component definition, apply to the entire app, apply a render mode programmatically. Hold on, I may have found it. The scenario is covered. Apply a render mode. So I'm looking in this. Basically, there was pre-rendering, and then this is, I think, what I'm looking for. The problem is I don't think I can say render mode equals null. Well, I don't think I can do that.
Yeah, you don't want it to be. You can't have a render mode null.
Right. What I want is I want it to be a render. I want it to be that. See, to disable pre-rendering. It's not about disabling pre-rendering. That's not it. So I think, is it going to let me do this? Render mode. Where was it? Render mode, and then it's showing. It's doing the. Can I do this? I bet you I can't. Oh wow. Huh. I wonder. Now, which one am I in? Okay, I'm in the one that I thought I was in, except that I'm on the login Razor, which I don't really want. In fact, I think I'm going to have to delete this. Okay, so we have login.razor. I have no idea. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm saying render mode, drop into Razor syntax, write some C# code, set it to null. Why do I feel like there's just no way? Oh, yeah. It didn't like that. It specifically, I think, is complaining about the render mode being null.
Right.
All right.
It needs to be something.
Yep. Okay, so do I have to do it? Maybe it's just easier to, instead of trying to swim too much against the grain for now, is let's go to app.razor and we will use this little pattern here. So what they do in their apps.razor is they basically say, well, app.razor is a component too. so we can have a code block.
Right.
And our code block is going to detect if you're in the /accounts path. But what it does mean is that instead of having this render mode just statically declared, that you end up taking this and moving it. And I don't know that I necessarily had.
Right.
No, it's fine. That's at least compared. Well, when I say it's fine, it's what they're doing.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So okay. So now the question is login going to but see, our login is at login, not account login. So well, I think we're still running client side here. In fact, I'm going to prove it. Yeah, login page initialized. So we're still running client side because my pathing was not /account.
Yep.
Now the code is still working. Like nothing's blowing up.
No, but you're writing to the console like we thought, hopefully. Although it hit a breakpoint at some point.
It
right.
should have, except that it didn't. So I have a feeling that it's kind of in some weird place now. So what I want to do is I want to go back to that routes.razor. No, I'm sorry, it's not routes.razor. It's nav menu. Navmenu.razor, which says that login is going to be here. That's weird, though, that it found the login component. I thought I deleted the login component.
I thought,
wasn't that strange?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, see, it says it can't be found. But didn't I move it?
Isn't there a reference at the like a page / at the top of login?
Oh, that's right. That's right. Oh, but now it's not happy about that at all.
Well, we need /account, don't we? You had /login.
Oops. Okay. Yep, you were right. That just trying to leave it like this, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Or at least if you /, it's like, oh, okay. We're good now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this would be nice if this actually did what we wanted here. Okay, so it opened this, but now the question is where? Look at that. We are server side.
There you go.
We're server side. I'm going to double check by going clients, looking at the console. Nothing.
You see nothing
at all. Yep. So we have moved the login component server side. Congratulations to us there. And now that we've done that, I should be able to type something in. We're not going to be there yet, but this submit happens. Let's double check that that's happening. It's all happening.
Server side.
Okay.
Beautiful.
I think it's step one anyways. And what's really interesting here, and this is what's going to make client side so interesting, is that you could argue if you're watching, like, well, you're just following the template. And that's true. But I think there might be people watching saying like, well, what if I want the login form to still be client side and maybe communicate? You heard me say the example earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Communicate over an API. Can we do that? I don't know. I think maybe we can do that. But I don't know. So let's see. We want to sign someone in now. And so in order to do that, do I have everything I need to do that? Let's try bringing this code back in. Okay, and this time around, the name model does not exist. That is true because for some reason, well, just for a form of clarity, I called it my form model. We don't have support for this, but am I going to get, but see, now I'm getting help because I'm on the server side.
Yes, which is where the claims belong.
Yeah, claims are all server side, and sign in async is from, that's an extension method that lives in ASP.NET Core Authentication. So these two things have just been added.
Nice.
Boy, this would be something. Now we have not yet really filled this part out with, so we may blow up here, but I don't know. What we're saying here is we're saying that we are adding these claims to a new claims identity that's of the authentication type TDTS cookie. And we talked all about auth schemes and auth types on a previous show. It was a little mind bending to realize that you could create claims principles for different auth schemes, and they're like in different bubbles. But let's see what happens. Okay, so we're here. We're signed in. Forms model is not null. This is just because I just wanted to make sure that everything was working. But notice the username didn't come across. We've dealt with this before. So it's just, people just might not remember. So it's going to blow up. It's like, I can't create it. Yeah, it's not going to work. It's like, I can't do what you're asking because name was null.
Is it the authorization, not the authorization, the forms cookie token thing?
It's that on initialized keeps running, and it keeps creating a new model. You remember dealing with this?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and the thing about it is you'll never figure it out. Like,
nope.
It's really crazy. It's a really crazy one where you're just going to be like, "What's the deal?" So what's happening? And let's go ahead and let's set a breakpoint here.
Yeah.
Is we'll run it again. And we'll say login. And this should set the breakpoint off. Did I click it? Yep. So the breakpoint, we are initializing the component. My form model is now new.
Yeah.
Which means it's new. There's nothing in it. You have a valid credential, but name is null. That could be an issue, but it doesn't matter. So we put in a username, we click login, and we're back in on initialize. We're going to wipe out the model. The model has the answer. Like, it was right there, and we're in the middle of wiping it out. So the trick is that we only want to create a new model if my form model is null. That's the only way we want to do it. And so there is an operator in C# that helps us do that. It's the null coalescing assignment operator. I think that's the name of it, which basically says only perform this assignment if the left side is null.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, when we come in the first time, my form model is null. We create a new credential. The second time we come in, my form model is not null. We don't create the new credential.
Yeah.
Unless there's some other piece that I forgot. I think that's the big issue. All right, so we go to login. I think we're going to hit this breakpoint. It's taking its time, though. My form model is null. Now it is not null. It's a credential object. So then we continue. We put in our username. We click login. Let's see. My form model is, that's interesting. Oh, there is something weird about, but it didn't take my value. Oh, I know why. I know why it didn't take the value. So that's good. One thing at a time. Good for viewers who are new, I think. So it's like, well, why? Wait a second. We didn't blow away the my form model, but why didn't it bind the value? The reason it didn't bind the value is because, remember, we have changed this render mode type from interactive to completely server-side rendering. And when you do that, you remember now? When you do that, there's a parameter, there's an attribute that you put on your model. This attribute instructs Blazor to fill this model from forms.
Got it. Okay.
Oops. Indicates, I was hoping it would stay, indicates that the value of the associated property should be supplied from the form data for the form with the specified name.
Okay.
That behavior is slightly different than if you're an interactive, meaning even Blazor server. Blazor server, you don't have to do that because, remember, it's Blazor server with its SignalR circuit that is updating.
Yes.
And in Blazor WebAssembly itself is updating. The code is running interactively. But in server-side rendering, we have delivered the form to the web page, and we've gone away. Request over.
Yep.
Then you submit the form, and Blazor steps in and says, like, well, yeah, you submitted a form. That's great. I don't know what to do with it. And what you're telling it is, like, get parameters out of the form, drop them into this model. And so it does the model binding on the fly in server-side rendering, but only because of this attribute.
That's interesting. Okay.
So
Awesome.
what's nice here is that we have run into issue after issue. We know the solutions. So hopefully that helps you if you're watching and you're saying, like, I tried doing this from scratch and it just blew up. And it's like, well, by going step by step by step, you can see how each of these things work together. Now, I've said that. We're running down to the last few minutes here, and we're hoping that this really does let us sign in, which will at least get us through form sign in. And then I think next time we can say now external providers, Entra ID, Google, whatever. So let's see. My form model is null because it's a brand new form. And we're going to put in my username and we're going to try to sign this person in. My form model is filled from the form. Thank you to the attribute. And because it's filled, this particular operator is not going to new it back up. Instead, we're down in the submitted world. Is the form model null? It is not. So let's get the username out. And now let's double check what's popping up. This is all doing what we want in our little console write line pseudo debugging land. We're going to create a claim. We're going to create a claims identity and sign them in. And now the interesting thing here is that we can't tell what happened.
Right.
And I also think,
go to the homepage, right?
I'm not sure though that this is going to do what we wanted. See, we're not signed in.
Okay.
And it'll be like, well, now why? Why didn't that sign us in? And I think that the reason is because I have now said here that we are going to sign in this user for the TDTS cookie auth scheme.
Yeah.
But that's not the auth scheme that I think is wired up in Program CS.
Oh, wait.
So
who's Program CS?
Right. Which side?
Exactly.
I know. Which side does this need to be wired up on? So what I'm going to do, see if
I would
we
think
can,
that's server side, right? Because your page there is running server side.
I think it's going to be server side, but let's see what inspiration we get really quick from. If I go to the reference app, which is, and look at Program CS, what do we do here? See, they do this stuff. They say default scheme, application scheme. Okay. So I think they do it there. And then let's go to Program CS and they just say add author. They don't do anything here. Okay. I think you're right that if we set this up correctly here, we're good. So the inspiration we're going to take for that is our Blazor auth from scratch server side code, which I'm going to try to get up into Visual Studio very quickly. Oh, come on. Come on, Visual Studio. You could do it. I know it's the third instance, and we're streaming. And, okay, let's go take a look. Okay, so in this version, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do at all. We say add authentication, TDTS cookie, and add cookie. I think this is what we want.
Makes sense. Yep.
I think this is what we want. So let's come here. We don't want the external stuff yet. And this is how we're going to set up authentication. We're going to say that the default scheme is TDTS cookie. That's a little superfluous, but it's just to make sure we're always on that scheme. And then we're adding the TDTS cookie. Okay. The issue here, and this is what may take some investigation in the future, is this kicking off the persistent auth, the persistent authentication state provider? Is it kicking it off, right? So that's the client side. Here's the persisting side. So what we want to see is we want to see on persisting a sync fire. That's what we want to see happen.
Okay.
Okay, I can start to get rid of some of these breakpoints so that we move a little quicker. Oh, interesting. Okay. I'm not sure that it did persist something, but it didn't really do. But now that I put in my username, okay, hold on. This is a good sign.
Back. Yeah.
I'm in the on persisting section. Who is this claims principal? Oh, but they're not authenticated. Okay. So nothing happened there. Are we going to end up back in here? No, we did not end up back in here after sign in async. So I feel like, oh, hold on. Oh, look at this. It came back into it again now that I'm going to the home page, and it is setting up the persistent state.
Huh.
So look at that. There it is.
Beautiful.
Oh, but then it went away.
Wait, what?
Wow, that's interesting. We're going to have to look into what happened there, because it's like the persisting state server sent it over, and then it's, I think, after pre-rendering, something's making it disappear. So there's an interesting piece to investigate. There is why did Blazor WebAssembly seem to have it for a second, and then I think it's a pre-rendering thing. I think pre-rendering had it, and then it disappeared. So we'll have to dig into that. But unfortunately, I know we're getting close to stand up for both of us. So what did we accomplish today? We tried making a login component, but we were doing this client side, which I think a lot of people would start with. They would be like, oh, I want it to work everywhere, so I'm going to put it client side. But then you realize you have some problems, because how am I going to sign the user in? So we moved it back server side. But now you have a new problem, which is, wait a second, I said global interactive WebAssembly. How do I get my one page to not be that way? And this is a technique to allow you to at least take some components and say, no, these are not going to be interactive. So it's like a weird way of taking back global interactivity. And it's a technique that we learned from the templates. And then after we did that, we had to go through some steps to basically not just create our form, but make sure that parameters were passing through and that we were actually signing the user in. But after we signed the user in, we seem to have one last issue, which is that over in the Blazor WebAssembly component, during pre-rendering, this worked as expected, but after pre-rendering, apparently it seems to have lost that user. So we just got to figure that out.
And did it say, it didn't say hello, it just said,
we just say, oh, whoops, I brought the wrong thing in. What it says is you're not signed in. So it's like during pre-rendering, it came through and recognized that we were authorized.
Yeah.
And then after that, it like lost it somehow. And I just don't know how yet.
Okay.
But I think we'll figure it out.
I think so. I mean, we figured out a lot today. We walked through a lot of different pain points. So
yeah,
hopefully that was helpful for folks out there. We've got watching and learning. Love to hear your thoughts, and if this is helping you understand how authentication is working inside of .NET.
Yeah, especially inside of Blazor in a component-based framework, because all the previous frameworks in some respects were page request happens, you're done. You don't have to worry about like anything. There's nothing coming in to kind of modify stuff after the fact. That's just the way it works in MVC. That's the way it works in Razor pages. Sure, you can write client-side JavaScript, but that's a different issue from we rendered a page based on this context and based on this user. That's how we made our rendering choices. Blazor adds a new wrinkle to it, is you want to design components. You want to build a component-based website, and you don't want the components, you don't want them to care whether they're server or client or whatever. They should just be agnostic. And so we're learning about the difficulties of that, especially when it comes to authentication. So interesting stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it is Friday, so hopefully wherever you are in the world, you have a great weekend. And we do have a holiday in the US coming up next week, but I think we'll be able to get a couple shows in before then. Rich and I will schedule those and try to get them scheduled up on YouTube. Wouldn't that be something else?
Yeah.
So whether you are watching us live or after the fact, Rich, this was great. Really appreciate you joining me and helping talk through these issues. And
that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so in any case, we both have got to run to meetings in a few minutes, and hopefully you enjoy your day, and we'll see you all next time. Do I have this all set up on the Dev Talk Show? Oh, that's not it.